The funniest part wasn't that the HOA fined my ladder. The funniest part was that they waited until I climbed down before handing me the violation notice. Apparently, standing on the ladder was acceptable. Owning it was the real problem. My name is Grant Lawson, and if you'd told me a 6-foot fiberglass ladder would one day become the most controversial structure in Brookstone Meadows, I would have laughed. Then again, I also used to think common sense had a permanent address in my neighborhood. I was wrong. The ladder belonged to my father. He was an electrician for 38 years, and that yellow fiberglass ladder had been with him through thousands of jobs. Every scratch on its side came with a story. Every paint stain reminded him of a house he'd helped someone fix. When he retired, he gave it to me with one simple instruction: take care of your own house. So I did. That Saturday morning, I was replacing the porch light fixture. The old one had filled with rainwater after a storm, and every time someone flipped the switch, it sounded like an angry aquarium. The ladder was leaning safely against the porch. My toolbox sat beside it. I was halfway through installing the new light when I heard the familiar electric whine of an HOA golf cart. I didn't even have to look. Only one person in Brookstone Meadows drove like she believed speed bumps were personal insults. Sandra Whitmore, HOA president, professional collector of unnecessary authority. Sandra dressed like every day was casual Friday at a law firm nobody enjoyed visiting. Perfect white blouse, navy slacks, designer sunglasses, leather portfolio tucked under one arm like it contained nuclear launch codes instead of landscaping complaints. She parked in front of my house, folded her arms, and waited. I climbed down carefully. "Morning, Sandra." She didn't return the greeting. Instead, she pointed at the ladder. "Grant, how long has that been there?" I looked at my watch. "About 22 minutes. It has been visible from the street. That's generally how ladders work." She opened her portfolio. Section 6, Paragraph M of the Brookstone Meadows exterior. Appearance standards prohibits construction equipment, maintenance tools, ladders, scaffolding, work platforms, and repair apparatus from remaining visible within front-facing residential areas. I looked around. I'm literally repairing my porch. "You are currently standing on the ground." "Because I climbed down to talk to you." She nodded once. "Meaning the ladder is presently unattended." I stared at her. "Sandra, I climbed down because you interrupted me." She smiled politely. "The rule addresses appearances, not intentions." There it was. The sentence. The one that made absolutely no sense unless your paycheck somehow depended on upsetting homeowners. My neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, was watering her roses across the street. She called over. "He's been working all morning." Sandra didn't even turn around. "This is an HOA matter." Mrs. Jenkins muttered something involving garden hoses and dictatorships. Sandra handed me a violation notice. $195. Remove the ladder immediately. Future violations would result in daily fines and an architectural compliance hearing. I looked at the paper, then at the ladder, then back at Sandra. My father's ladder. I'm sure it has sentimental value. It does. Unfortunately, sentiment does not override community standards. I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was somehow even more ridiculous than I expected. She watched me carefully. "Is something amusing?" "You know." I folded the violation notice. I was almost finished. "Excellent. But now I'm curious." "About what?" I rested one hand on the ladder. "You said the problem is that people can see it." The problem is that it appears to be unattended construction equipment. And if it wasn't construction equipment? She frowned. It is a ladder. But what if it served another approved purpose? Sandra sighed the exhausted sigh of someone convinced she'd won. Grant, a ladder is a ladder. I smiled. My father always used to say that the difference between a tool and a masterpiece was imagination. Sandra had just reminded me. If you're watching Sovereign Verdict, subscribe now because Karen had just declared war on my father's old ladder. She wanted it gone. Instead, I was about to give the neighborhood its very own watchtower. That evening, after I finally finished replacing the porch light, I carried my father's ladder into the garage, sat down beside it, and opened the Brookstone Meadows HOA handbook. Not because I respected it, because I intended to beat it. The violation notice lay beside my laptop like a bad joke. According to Sandra Whitmore, my 6-foot fiberglass ladder had somehow become an architectural emergency because it existed in public view for 22 minutes while I repaired my own house. Fine. If visibility was the problem, I needed to understand exactly what was allowed to be visible. The HOA handbook was 312 pages long. There were regulations for porch furniture, holiday decorations, mailbox posts, decorative flags, flower pots, rain barrels, and something called visual continuity principles, which sounded less like neighborhood management and more like an expensive yoga class. Sandra had quoted the ladder rule correctly. Construction equipment, maintenance tools, ladders, scaffolding, work platforms, and repair apparatus could not remain visible in front-facing areas unless actively in use. I almost closed the laptop. Then I kept reading. Because HOA presidents usually stop reading the moment they find the sentence that lets them fine somebody. Buried deep inside the community enhancement section, I found a paragraph that made me smile. Section 11, Paragraph D. Decorative observation features, neighborhood safety displays, educational structures, commemorative installations, and community-themed landscape elements may be maintained within front-facing areas when stationary, well-maintained, and architecturally compatible with the residents. I leaned back. Decorative observation features, neighborhood safety displays, educational structures. The ladder couldn't remain as a ladder, but it absolutely could become an observation feature. The next morning, my daughter Sophie wandered into the garage while I was staring at the ladder. She was 11, endlessly curious, and inherited my dangerous habit of asking one more question than most adults wanted to answer. "What are you doing?" "Planning." She looked at the violation notice. "Oh, the ladder lady again?" "Yep." She sat beside me. "So, what's the plan?" I showed her the highlighted paragraph. She read it slowly. "Observation feature?" "Yes." She thought for a few seconds. "Like a lookout tower?" I looked at her, then at the ladder, then back at her. "Exactly." Her grin appeared instantly. "Can we make it look official?" Now we were thinking the same way. I called my friend Ben. Ben owned a custom sign company and believed every project became better if it contained unnecessary craftsmanship. When I explained Sandra's ladder violation, he laughed for nearly 30 seconds before he could answer. "So, you want to disguise a ladder? I want to elevate it." Pun intended? Absolutely. By Saturday morning, Ben pulled into my driveway with cedar boards, decorative trim, weatherproof paint, rope railing, brass hardware, and one beautifully carved wooden sign wrapped in moving blankets. We weren't modifying the ladder itself. That was important. Dad's ladder remained completely intact. Instead, Ben built a removable wooden platform around the base that stabilized it upright. Decorative cedar side panels concealed the support braces. A small rope handrail surrounded the bottom viewing area. We added flower planters around the base, so the whole structure blended naturally into the landscaping. Then came the sign. Brookstone Neighborhood. Watchtower established for community safety. Please report suspicious squirrels responsibly. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped the drill. Ben shrugged. It needed professionalism. Sophie insisted on adding a pair of old binoculars hanging from a decorative hook near the platform. They don't have to work, she explained. They just look official. She was absolutely right. By late afternoon, the entire display stood proudly beside my front flower bed. The ladder remained exactly where it was, but now it was part of a carefully landscaped decorative observation feature, complete with flower boxes, informational plaque, rope railing, and tiny wooden bird silhouettes carved into the trim. It looked ridiculous. It also looked surprisingly beautiful. Mrs. Jenkins wandered across the street carrying a plate of cookies. She stared for nearly a full minute. I don't know whether to salute it or climb it. Neither, I said. It's decorative. She nodded thoughtfully. I've seen less convincing public monuments. At exactly 8:14 Monday morning, Sandra arrived. Her golf cart rolled to a slow stop. She stepped out confidently, then looked up. The ladder now stood proudly inside what appeared to be an elegant miniature neighborhood observation station, surrounded by flowers, polished cedar trim, and the freshly mounted carved sign. She removed her sunglasses, read the sign once, read it again, then looked at me. Grant, good morning. What? She pointed toward the structure. Is this? I smiled. A neighborhood safety observation feature. Her left eye twitched. It is a ladder. It is the primary vertical access component. It has binoculars, community awareness. It has flower boxes, architectural compatibility. It says report suspicious squirrels. We've had one that keeps stealing birdseed. Sandra stood completely silent. Then she slowly reached into her portfolio. I'll see you tonight. I nodded. I'll keep watch until then. By 7 o'clock, the Brookstone Meadows clubhouse looked less like an HOA meeting and more like opening night for a very strange community theater production. Every chair was occupied. Neighbors lined the walls. 3 people stood in the hallway, peeking through the doorway because somebody had posted a photo of my neighborhood watchtower on the community Facebook page, and by lunchtime it had accumulated more comments than the annual budget meeting. Mrs. Jenkins sat in the front row holding a small bag of popcorn. She claimed it was for her blood sugar. Nobody believed her. Sophie walked beside me carrying a binder almost as thick as mine. She had spent the afternoon drawing little diagrams explaining how the observation tower worked, complete with arrows pointing to the decorative binoculars and a page titled, Things the Watchtower Has Successfully Observed. Number 1 was birds. Number 2 was squirrels. Number 3 was Karen. I made her remove the last one before we walked inside. Sandra Whitmore sat at the center of the board table in a charcoal blazer that somehow made her look even more determined than usual. Beside her sat 3 board members. Harold, the treasurer, treated every meeting like a tax audit. Nancy chaired the landscaping committee and genuinely cared about neighborhood appearance. And Richard, a retired civil engineer, was already studying photographs of the watchtower with unmistakable curiosity. Sandra struck the gavel. This emergency architectural hearing concerns Lot 42, where homeowner Grant Lawson has responded to a ladder violation by constructing— She paused. An alleged neighborhood watchtower. I stood. Not alleged. Sandra inhaled slowly. You admit constructing it? I admit constructing a decorative neighborhood safety observation feature. Richard immediately adjusted his glasses. Sandra noticed. Richard? I'm listening. She pointed toward the large photograph displayed behind her. Mr. Lawson, do you deny that the central component of this structure is the same ladder previously cited as a violation? No. A satisfied smile appeared on her face. Excellent. I opened my binder. I deny that it remains construction equipment. The smile disappeared. I handed copies of the highlighted covenant page to each board member. Section 11, paragraph D allows decorative observation features, neighborhood safety displays, educational structures, commemorative photo installations, and community-themed landscape elements. Nancy read the paragraph carefully. It does say observation features. Sandra leaned forward. The intent was decorative gazebos and viewing gardens. It doesn't say gazebos. It says architecturally compatible. It matches the cedar trim on my porch. Richard looked at the photographs again. The flower boxes do match. Sandra stared at him. Richard, I'm making an architectural observation. Mrs. Jenkins whispered loudly enough for half the room to hear. That's what observation towers are for. A wave of laughter rolled through the clubhouse. Sandra tapped her gavel sharply. This is still a ladder? No, I replied calmly. It is the primary structural access element of a stationary observation installation. She pointed at the binoculars. They don't even work. They're decorative. The sign mentions suspicious squirrels. So does my daily experience. Even Harold smiled. Sandra looked increasingly frustrated. The HOA is not responsible for squirrels. I never said it was. Sophie quietly raised her hand. Sandra closed her eyes for a second. Yes, Sophie? Sophie walked to the front carrying one of her drawings. I made this. She placed it in front of Nancy. It showed our observation tower surrounded by flowers. Tiny birds sat on nearby branches. Mrs. Jenkins waved from across the street. A mail carrier smiled while walking past. In the corner, Sophie had written, Things you can watch from the Watchtower neighborhood. Birds, storm clouds, lost dogs, package deliveries, fireworks, sunsets, friendly neighbors. Nancy smiled warmly. This is adorable, Sandra sighed. We are discussing architecture. Sophie looked at her seriously. It helps people watch the neighborhood. Sandra folded her arms. How? I answered. My father spent 38 years as an electrician. That ladder reminds me to take care of my home. My daughter helped turn it into something the entire neighborhood enjoys. Mrs. Jenkins raised her hand from the audience. I've seen 6 different neighbors stop to admire it. Richard nodded. I drove by twice. Sandra blinked. You what? I wanted another look at the construction. Before Sandra could respond, the clubhouse doors opened. Ben walked in carrying a rolled-up blueprint tube. Behind him entered Officer Daniel Foster from the Brookstone Police Department's Community Outreach Division. Sandra slowly turned toward me. Grant, I smiled. Funny thing about neighborhood watchtowers. I thought it might be helpful to invite someone from Neighborhood Watch. Officer Daniel Foster stepped into the clubhouse with the relaxed confidence of someone who had spent years attending community meetings where people insisted squirrels were conducting organized crime. He wore a Navy community outreach polo, carried a small folder under one arm, and smiled politely at everyone before taking a seat near the front. Sandra looked at him, then at me. "Officer Foster, this is an HOA architectural matter." "It is," he replied. "Mr. Lawson simply asked whether I'd be willing to explain how neighborhood watch programs work." Sandra forced a smile. "I'm not sure how that's relevant." Officer Foster glanced at the large photo of my observation tower projected on the wall. "I think it becomes relevant when the structure is being described as a neighborhood safety display." Richard leaned forward immediately. "Please continue." Officer Foster opened his folder. "Our department encourages residents to participate in neighborhood watch activities. While we obviously don't require observation towers," he smiled slightly, "we absolutely encourage visible reminders that neighbors should look out for one another." Sandra crossed her arms. "That ladder does not improve public safety." "No," Officer Foster said calmly. "People do." The room became quiet. He continued. "When Mr. Lawson showed me photographs of the display, what stood out wasn't the ladder. It was the message. Know your neighbors. Pay attention to your street. Look after one another." He looked around the room. "Those ideas prevent more crime than signs ever will." Mrs. Jenkins nodded enthusiastically. "I've lived here 20 years. I know more neighbors now than I did 6 months ago." Officer Foster smiled. "Exactly." He handed several papers to the board. "Our community outreach office also provides neighborhood watch participation certificates." She looked down. "It does." Officer Foster nodded. "After visiting the Lawson property this afternoon, I saw neighbors stopping to talk, children riding bicycles while adults chatted nearby, and several residents introducing themselves to one another." He looked toward me. "I haven't seen that level of spontaneous neighborhood interaction in quite a while." Sandra looked increasingly uncomfortable. "But," she pointed toward the photo, "it's still a ladder." "No," Richard said quietly. "It's an approved observation feature built around a ladder." Everyone looked at him. He adjusted his glasses. "The distinction matters." Sandra blinked. "Richard, the structure complies with the decorative observation feature section. The landscaping is appropriate. The materials are well maintained. The ladder is permanently integrated into a stationary display." He shrugged. "I don't particularly enjoy saying this, but the documents support Mr. Lawson." Harold slowly nodded. "They do." Nancy smiled. "And the flower boxes are lovely." Sandra looked around the table in disbelief. "You cannot seriously be supporting this." I stepped forward one last time. "My father gave me that ladder when he retired. He told me to take care of my home. I tried. You fined me because the ladder was visible while I repaired my porch. So instead of hiding it, my daughter and I turned it into something that reminds neighbors to watch out for each other." I looked toward Sophie. She smiled back. "It isn't really about the ladder anymore. It's about the neighborhood." Officer Foster nodded. I couldn't have said it better. For several long seconds, nobody spoke. Finally, Nancy cleared her throat. "I move to dismiss the violation against Lot 42 and approve the Lawson Neighborhood Watchtower as a decorative neighborhood safety observation feature under Section 11, Paragraph D, subject to continued maintenance and no increase in overall height. Richard immediately raised his hand. Second. Sandra stared at both of them. This sets a terrible precedent. Richard smiled slightly. It sets a written precedent. Harold laughed quietly. That's generally how meeting minutes work. All in favor? Nancy asked. Nancy raised her hand. Richard raised his. Harold hesitated for only a moment before raising his as well. 3 votes. Sandra's hand remained firmly on the table. The motion passes, Nancy announced. The violation is dismissed. The neighborhood watchtower is officially approved. The room broke into applause. Mrs. Jenkins actually stood up to clap. Sophie threw her arms around me. Ben whispered, "Best ladder I've ever helped promote." Sandra slowly gathered her papers and closed her portfolio. She looked at me for a long moment. This neighborhood used to be simpler. I smiled. No. It was just looking in the wrong direction. A week later, Officer Foster returned with an official neighborhood watch participation sign from the police department. We mounted it neatly beside the flower bed beneath the tower. Kids began calling it the lookout. Neighbors stopped to chat more often. Mrs. Jenkins started organizing evening walks. Even Harold admitted more people seemed to know each other's names. My father's ladder never carried another porch light after that. Instead, it stood proudly among the flowers, reminding everyone that communities aren't built by HOA violations. They're built by neighbors who actually look out for one another. Sandra never mentioned the tower again. But every time she drove past in her golf cart, she slowed down for just a second before continuing. Maybe she was checking the landscaping. Maybe she was reading the sign. Or maybe, for the first time, she was keeping watch too. So remember this from Sovereign Verdict. Subscribe for more stories. Read every HOA rule twice. Protect what matters. And if an HOA Karen demands you remove your ladder, don't hide it. Turn it into the most respected neighborhood watchtower your block has ever seen.